Good eve good evening and welcome to the Monday, September 19th, 2022 School Board Special Meeting. The time is now 6 p.m. The school board would like to take this moment to respectfully acknowledge we are residing on the traditional land of the Dene people. Our mission is to provide an excellent, equitable education in a safe, supportive environment so all students will succeed and contribute to a diverse and changing society. Can we please get the roll call?
Mr. Sampson is not here, and I have not heard from him. Mrs. Matheson?
Here.
Mr. Doran?
Here.
Mrs. Sanderson?
Here.
Miss Marati?
Here.
Mrs. Smith?
Here.
Mrs. Luke?
Here.
Okay, the board has a quorum.
Thank you. Public comments limited to items on the agenda only. Core value, engage with students, family, staff, and community to support student success. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment? Seeing no one in the room and hearing that we have no one signed up, public comments are now closed. First on the agenda, negotiations. Goal and objective, create an environment that supports the strengths and needs of staff so they can create a safe climate where students thrive. Negotiations to include a possible executive session for an update to consider current proposals and provide direction to the bargaining team. Can I get a motion, please?
Move to convene into executive session with the negotiating team for an update to consider current proposals and provide direction to the bargaining team, matters the immediate knowledge of which could have an adverse effect on the net finances of the district.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to go into executive session. Any opposed? Seeing none, we are now in executive session. this not, oh, there we go. Can I get a motion to come out of executive session, please?
Move to get out of executive session?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any opposed? Seeing none, we are out of executive session. Next, we have our non-appeal disciplinary matter. Core value, provide a safe learning environment. Administration, is there anything that you would like to add on this disciplinary matter?
No, no, just, is this on?
Oh, I apologize. Wait one moment. Can we get a motion, please?
Move to convene an executive session?
Nope.
Oh. Move to uphold administration's recommendations for student 09192201.
Second.
Sorry.
All right, the motion has been moved and seconded. Mrs. Moline,
No, administration doesn't have anything further.
anything further from board members? Seeing nothing further, Ms. Richardson, can we please get the vote?
Mrs. Matheson,
Yes.
Mr. Doran,
Yes.
Mrs. Sanderson,
Yes. Yes.
Miss Marati,
Yes.
Mrs. Smith,
Yes.
Mrs. Luke.
Yes,
Motion carried.
thank you. Can I get a motion to adjourn our special meeting, please?
Move to adjourn?
Second.
Any opposed? Meeting adjourned. welcome to the Monday, September 19th, 2022 School Board Work Session. The time is now 7 p.m. The school board would like to take this moment to respectfully acknowledge we are residing on the traditional land of the Dene people. Our mission is to provide an excellent, equitable education in a safe, supportive environment so all students will succeed and contribute to a diverse and changing society. Mrs. Richardson, could we please get the roll call?
Mrs. Matheson.
Here.
Mr. Doran.
Here.
Mrs. Sanderson.
Here.
Miss Marati.
Here.
Mrs. Smith.
Here.
And Mrs. Luke.
Here.
And Mr. Sampson is not here. The board has a quorum.
Thank you so much. Our one item, which I guess I will turn the time over to me since Mrs. Tuttle and I worked on this. We worked, let me start up again. Discussion and work on superintendent search. Goals and objective: create an environment that supports the strengths and needs of staff so they can create a safe climate where students thrive. The school board will begin its work and discussions on its upcoming superintendent search. And before we get going on that, I do want to thank Mrs. Richardson for getting all of this information to us and helping create our spreadsheets with all of the information. So thank you so much for doing that. We appreciate you. So before you, you see we have 7 proposals given to us. Mrs. Tuttle and I worked hard to research any and all possible avenues for companies that could help us in the superintendent search. We did not just limit it to companies that have been utilized or approached in the past, but we really tried to expand and see what other options are out there. We do know that there are a number of companies who have traditionally worked in Alaska, and they have proposals here as well. Like I said, just as information for the public that might be listening, this is our work session to discuss our possible options for companies. And I like to read the companies. It's Association of Alaska School Boards, or AASB, GR Recruiting, McPherson and Jacobson, LLC, Ray and Associates, Inc., BWP and Associates, Greenwood, Asher and Associates, and Hazard Young, Atia and Associates. So those are our 7 that we received proposals from. We will be having a vote on this at the October meeting. I apologize, let me pull that up real quick to give the correct date. At the October 4th meeting, that is where it is currently scheduled to have a vote. And if after this work session, we don't have at least a clear forerunner or 2 that we are considering as options, we can create an ad hoc committee to really dive into it and give their report at the beginning of the October 4th meeting before a decision is set in place for us to vote. And so I just wanted to give kind of that brief outline of a couple of informational items so that anybody in the community that is paying attention can kind of follow along with us and where we're at. Does anybody have, or Mrs. Moline, is there anything that you would like to add?
No, not at this time. I will say that the spreadsheet was helpful in the organization of it, and there's no particular order in this, in how they are organized in your packets or on the spreadsheet.
Is there anyone that would like to start with thoughts or ideas? Mr. Doran.
What I thought, suggestion to start is if there's any that somebody would suggest not be considered right off the top, and maybe we'd narrow the field. I know I have two candidates on that.
Would you like to share those?
Okay. I suggest that the Greenwood Asher and Associates is well beyond our financial abilities. They're a minimum of 60,000, and actually, based on their formula, it would be higher than that just to start. Good quality. I don't have any. It's just way out of the line of everybody else in their numbers. And then the other one is GR Recruiting, Gary Ray. Lots of typos, continuing not being able to spell Juno correctly, and
Juno?
Juno, correct. And those were the same things when they applied 2 years ago. So in 2 years, they still haven't done anything. And the other real problem that we had last time, they give no contact number. They give 4 offices across the country, but no contact number. It was very, very hard to track them down. Who do you call where? So for those reasons, I would suggest those 2 might be eliminated and narrow our conversation.
Ms. Marati?
Thank you. I agree with Mr. Doran's suggestion that we talk about who to eliminate right off the board. And I fully agree with the 2 that Mr. Doran recommended to eliminate. Greenwood Asher also due to the cost, and GR Recruiting, but for a different, I agree, those are alarming, but also Gary Ray is the GR in GR Recruiting, and he was the former president of Ray and Associates, so one and the same when it comes to, so if you Google them, it comes up with a lot of media around Gary Ray not eliminating illegal questions from applications and interviews, and getting districts into some trouble with that. And then also some licensing requirements that were not honored. So for those reasons, I would suggest eliminating GR Recruiting and Ray and Associates.
One thought that I had was HYA, Hazard Young Atia. They have an incredibly late timeline on theirs. I don't know if anybody saw that we would be hiring in March. And I think going forward, that's something that concerns me. When we start the process, engage phase in October, and we don't actually select anybody until March, I think that's an incredibly long time frame to have no movement. And I feel that that is something that we also got in the middle of found ourselves in the middle of last time, is trying to get people. I mean, even last year, we tried to get somebody come up here, and it was already so much later. I would suggest we focus on ensuring that offers are done earlier rather than March. Not necessarily saying they can't be a possibility, but that's just something that really got me incredibly nervous, was such a late time frame. Mr. Doran and then Ms. Marati.
On HYA, and I say that I didn't feel they were a particularly strong one, so they're low on my list. With Ray and Associates, I'm inclined to be in favor of keeping them in the consideration for a couple of reasons. One is, yes, as Ms. Marati said, Gary Ray was the founder of that company. He left there.
Can you go closer to your mic? I don't.
Oh, okay.
Does anybody
Is this
else hear me?
picking up?
It's
They all
It's better.
sound really, but that's better. Okay. That Gary Ray is no longer with that company. And when I last vetted both of these districts that had used Ray and Associates when Gary Ray was still there, and they both list Alaskan placements. The districts were not particularly pleased. But then recently they were involved with the Anchorage search, and I had a chance to touch base with a board member from Anchorage just for a quick read. Were they pleased? That person said they were very pleased and are also using it to find some other executives. I'm not saying that's an endorsement, but I'm saying that maybe they have learned some other lessons and should still, at least they're one of the ones who've worked in Alaska and maybe have learned some things about working in Alaska. I would just say further consideration at this point for me.
Ms. Marani?
Can you clarify, did the Anchorage School District, the round that they just did, they used Ray and Associates?
Yes.
So both Gary Ray Recruiting and Ray and Associates list Anchorage and Matsu placements.
Okay.
And years ago, yeah, when Gary Ray was part of that, yes, they were both in. Gary Ray was involved in those. It's interesting that he did not list Juneau, though Ray and Associates list Juneau, and they were all, I think, at the same time. But
And to follow up with that, last year, Mr. Doran, in your research, through the chair,
Go ahead.
Mr. Doran mentioned in his research that the board from Juneau was not pleased with the results from Ray and Associates, is what I have in my notes from last year.
that is correct. They had some concerns.
Um,
But that was a number of years ago, but their experience at that time was,
May I talk about another firm?
Can I ask a quick clarifying? So it was Ray and Associates that did the most recent search in Anchorage and Matsu.
no, wait a minute.
And it was GR Recruiting that did the former one, correct?
No.
Or it was Ray and Associates that did the most recent?
Yes, for
'Kay,
for
I just-
Anchorage.
It sounded, okay, I just wanted to make sure that we're
Yeah.
clear. It was it was Ray and Associates that did the
Right.
most recent Anchorage superintendent search and did the Matsu superintendent search recently as well.
Let me double check that one on Matsu.
Are you okay with me going?
Go ahead, Ms. Marati.
Okay, good. For McPherson and Jacobson LLC, if you Google them, there's an article that comes up that says, even though they have guarantees, there was a district that placed that they placed with an unsuccessful superintendent, and they had to pay the superintendent's salary for a year, in accordance with the contract. So it came out to $256,000 plus benefits. And in this case, even though the board had the choice to have McPherson and Jacobson do another search for free, they were so unhappy with McPherson and Jacobson that they declined it. So that gives me some concern about them as a firm.
Go ahead, Ms. Matheson.
Thank you. Playing the devil's advocate here,
Can you come closer to your mic? Sorry, we're not picking up very good with our mics tonight.
so playing the devil's advocate on this last comment, I think that it was the responsibility of the school district to hire that person. Like McPherson didn't actually place them; they were just a suggestion. That school district hired them. That school district signed a contract with them. So I don't like that. That review just seems a little biased or a little, I don't know.
May I follow up?
Go ahead.
I agree, and that's why I said in the beginning that it was per their contract. So by contract, they understood what was happening. The bigger piece to that statement and what I gathered from the article was that because it was unsuccessful, they did have the opportunity to go back to McPherson for free and do the whole thing over again, and they chose not to because, and they stated in the article that they were unprofessional. They were unprofessional and frustrating. So it was less about the contract and the unsuccessful placement, more about what happened after that.
Could I ask what year that was?
What year?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't put that in my notes, but I can send the article to you.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. It says 2017.
Mrs. Smith?
Thank you. Is that even working at all? I can hear you. Okay, sorry. Usually I can hear myself. I can't hear myself. On the McPherson Jacobson, I actually really liked how they included their consultants' resumes in there, and that a lot of them had Alaska contact, and that just really made me happy to see people who would be involved in our process who were, you know, in rural Alaska, but Delta, Juneau, and other places that they weren't just from the lower 48 and have no context for Alaska.
One thing that I noticed about them is that they did the Valdez city schools last year while we were trying to find a superintendent as well at the same time. And I remember kind of sleuthing a bit, and there were very similar candidates as well. And so, and then they also did the Kenai Peninsula borough schools. I know that Valdez is incredibly small compared to our district, but the Kenai Peninsula is one of the big five. So I think that's something of note to kind of take away as well. Ms. Marotti?
Just for full transparency, what would be the cost, because I don't see it on here, for AASB, where it says none noted? Estimated cost provided by, is estimated cost provided by firm? That's worded funny. So, but then it says that they're going to, like, the next one's going to provide us 29,500. So because we used AASB, let me reword that. Because we used AASB previously, I know we have credit for going forward. So I'm just curious what the costs would be if AASB were to be selected. And
On their, actually in their proposal, it's 18,000 in their proposal. It's a typo on the, well, that's the base pay, is that 18,000. So in the, right here, it's 18,000 below the estimated cost provided by firm. So that would be, I guess that base pay is at 18,000. And did we have I do believe we do have a credit, correct?
Yes.
With AASB?
Yes.
so that was my question, is this with the credit?
I would assume it's without the credit considering how much they came.
Can I clarify that for you? I have current
Oh,
information.
you have current? Perfect. Mr. Doran?
Yep, that 18,000 is their current generic base. We do have a credit, and I've actually talked to Lon Garrison very recently, and he mentioned it also this summer, and then actually I called him today because I wanted to find out. I didn't want to get into numbers and stuff, but it would be lower than that because we do have a credit. And so he would, we have to call him and find out, and he'll calculate exactly what that is. But they did not finish, and that has been consistent when we finished with them, did as much as we did with them 2 years ago, and was repeated this summer when Joy and I were in Bethel. My conversation with Lon, that was it. They knew we were going to be doing a search, and then I wanted to confirm that today, whether this was with a credit because costs have gone up. But no, this is their normal base fee currently. We would be we would get a credit and lower that. He could work exact dollar amount with you, or if we do a ad hoc committee.
Do we, Mrs. Moline, do we have that on hand or on file?
The credit, how much the credit is, I have not seen that figure, so I don't know where we are with that. But I can find, do some digging into into the history of the transaction and find out where we are.
I can reach out to them and get that number.
Right. They did not provide that number. Lon will give it, will calculate that and give it to you what it is. So they have not sent something on that. This was put together as generic proposal, as their general proposal by the person who's heading up their search, doing a lot of their logistics on searches. And so you'd have to give him a call directly.
I'm surprised that they didn't make a proposal directly for our district, knowing what our credit was that was specific. I guess I'm just surprised by that.
Mhm.
That it wasn't a specified number, this is your credit, this is how much it would cost, and this is where we can go from there. That's a little surprising to me.
I would agree, and that's why I called, because I've been told on multiple occasions, and we were told that prior, when we ended our previous search, that it was not. I wanted to make sure that whether it was included or not, and so all I can tell you right now is it was not. It's good to know it's not. I'm surprised it wasn't on there originally, but.
Mrs. Smith and then Ms. Matheson.
Thank you. I understand the Alaska Association of School Boards has a lot of background information on us, and that we did go through the process with them, and that their fee is, minimal compared to the others. But one concern I had is, are they fully staffed and going to be able to really dedicate resources to our search? And that, they sent us a generic response makes me, just a little more concerned about that too. I know everybody's short-staffed and they do so many, many, many things, where, some of these other companies are just more focused on search, and it's what they do. So I'll just be concerned about that. And then the other just minimal concern I had was the background checks. I really am interested in really thorough background checks, and if that's something that we can pay extra to have a more thorough background check through a company like AASB, if they could assure us that they could bring their background check up to a higher level, I think, than the information that we got previously or that is stated in their documents. I would be more interested in them as a company, just with that assurance.
Ms. Matheson?
I feel the same way as Ms. Smith. And going down the spreadsheet, there's like a whole bunch of just little additional fees for AASB that can easily add up. You know, $20 here, $300 there, 500, 1260 a day. You know, I just feel that can add up super quickly, where the other ones don't seem to have those same little additional costs. So that's a big concern for me too.
Ms. Marati?
That's a great, through the chair, that's a great point. However, you will see that instead of an amount, it says that it'll be reimbursed actual out-of-pocket travel costs for food, travel, lodging, shopping, and other search-related expenses. And it says that across the board. And so instead of giving an exact amount of $12.60 a day that you can cap it at, they provide line items that are to be determined, is how I'm reading this.
Sorry, Mr. Doran.
That's fine. Thank you. Yeah, I think it is important to look at the additional costs because all of them do have those. Some do give a ballpark estimate, some don't. If it pleases the chair, I was just so we cover all the groups, and I really appreciate the extra ones that we were able to get things from. Just to talk about BWP and Associates. They're a little higher if you look at their total, but not completely. But I thought it was quite interesting that they very specifically said they made an outreach to NEA Alaska, which struck me in terms of this superintendent search. They didn't reach out to or certainly did not note that they didn't reach out to the Superintendent's Association or to the School Boards Association in Alaska, but to the Teaching Association. Great group. I don't want to minimize them in any way, but I thought that was an interesting distinction that they made a selling point for that, but not for the group that we're looking at. The other thing is that I found it interesting that we don't have to do any advertising, but if they advertise, they charge for each one of those. And it struck me that, you know, you're a recruiting firm, we're paying you to recruit, but why should we, you know, there should be at least some basic advertisement, but they seem to be completely that we would be charged for advertising. So that made me think, you know, and they have no experience in Alaska. I just put them again on my low end of the list for consideration. The last thing I was just going to say, I think it's great. We've started to raise some questions that we might want to ask for clarification from, and we just did with AASB. I think great questions, and maybe as we move ahead, that could set a little bit of a way to progress forward. Ones we want to consider, what questions we may want to clarify with them. Because I found it really good then when I talked to each of the ones who proposed last time to get a one-on-one conversation with them that way. So it was a good process.
So kind of in summary, as of this moment, it looks as though we kind of have 3 top candidates thus far, not necessarily stating that that's the way that the board is going to go, but just listening to the conversation thus far, it looks like AASB, McPherson and Jacobson, and Ray and Associates seem to be top contenders. I'm not sure if I'm mistaken, but if there's any other thoughts coming from the board thus far. Ms. Sanderson?
Yeah, I'm just gonna say that we just need to, we're gonna have to spend the money, and we need to look at the most, to me personally, I want the most diverse person or research that we can get. I also want somebody that's gonna, that has some large numbers of clients that they've had in the past. Another thing is, I don't think we should count, I mean, I know the two things that you threw out there, but, we're in a search, so we have to have, the person do the work. And I don't know how we're gonna, you know, decide on who we want, but, we want an extensive search. That's gonna take time, that's gonna take money. We knew that. So, we need to give ourselves the best playing field that we can have to have the best result for our community. So that's it. I don't know how we're gonna do that. So, mine, I have BWP, and I have the McPherson RA, and then I have 5. I just eliminated those 2. So, so I can't help you.
Looking at cost, ASB's base is 18,000, and that's before we look at any type of credit we already have. McPherson and Jacobson is 19,500, and Ray and Associates is 2,500. So really, they're all very similar in cost. And Ms. Sanderson, you mentioned BWP and Associates, that's a base of 22,500. So they're all very similar in cost. So when we're looking at these, they're within a couple of $1,000 base-wise. Mr. Doran and then Ms. Smith.
Just a perspective on McPherson and Jacobson. They were involved in Kenai and Valdez. It can be worth noting that Valdez has had a pretty steady turnover of superintendents. I'd have to go back and check exactly which search or searches that they were involved with. Valdez, Kenai, when I checked there, when they did the Kenai one, there was at best a mixed feeling regarding them, and that the board was left to do an awful lot of the work with that. So I have some questions about McPherson. I will say that it's good to talk with each of the organizations and get a feel for where they are. I think the other thing needing to look at with each one is what we get to see. Some you see everything, all the applicants. Some you only get to see the ones they have selected from there. And then the other question is that I would have, and I'll leave it at this point, is touchstone to people in Alaska, so that we can get, there are certainly outreach and recruitment in Alaska for people, as well as where they would feel, and we haven't had the conversation of how we would handle internal applicants and stuff, but how they handle those is also important.
Mrs. Smith and then Ms. Marati.
Thank you. I know that, I have my reservations about AASB, using them for the search. But I feel like if other members of the board are very interested in pursuing that route, that I could get on board with AASB with assurances that they would do more if we asked them to do more, that they would do additional advertising. Fine if we have to pay for additional advertising, but like Ms. Sanderson was saying, if we ask them to directly reach out to certain more diverse organizations, that they would just give us that cost and make that happen. And also, just with assurances from them that they do have the staffing and the sort of availability to really give us a lot of attention, because we will be having a third of our board will be new to the process. And then although we did go through a search before, we are also not the most super experienced board sitting right here. So we will have just a big slate of people who are really inexperienced. And because Alaska Association of School Boards is a teaching organization, I feel that it would be possible to have a really good search with them, as long as we have a strong board president, and that the board is willing to work for and ask for the things that are going to be required for the kind of search that I think that our community deserves.
Ms. Marotti?
Yeah, I agree. That's really good points. I am wondering if we could talk tonight, or just plant the seed for later conversation about seats at the table. So not voting, just advisory. For example, the student voice. I'm curious if Miss Smith could be involved in our discussions, or other stakeholders like the union, tribal, or military reps. I think that the board votes on this decision, but the stakeholders have a great opportunity to provide us that advisory piece. And if they're at the table, then there's a better chance that we will hear from them.
Mr. Doran?
Ask through the chair clarification. Are you talking about the table for choosing which search agency we use, or when we are in that whole search process, which I would definitely say we need stakeholders throughout that process in this. So my clarification is, are you talking about this selection?
May I?
Go ahead, Ms. Marotti.
Through the chair. My not the RFP for the search. I think that's a pretty clear cut. All the research has been done. But when it goes through the timeline of the rest of the search, I'm hoping that we can have those advisory pieces present and accounted for.
Okay.
Are you good, Mr. Doran?
That answers my question. So put me in the key for another one.
Okay. Ms. Smith?
I'm glad that other members can see the value of having the advisory members. I actually considered with Ms. Smith that why don't they come to our work sessions if they're interested? I feel like it was never said that they couldn't be at our work sessions. Like, she did come to a work session that we were doing once, and everyone was all, I didn't think you were coming, but it was something that was really important to her, and she did come to that work session. And I don't see that our work sessions are closed, so I don't see why they couldn't come if they wanted to, or even attend by Zoom if they wanted to. And some of our deliberations are done in an executive session. I think that our policy allows us to choose who's in the room for our executive session. So I don't really, I wouldn't have a problem with that. I actually think that would be good.
Mr. Doran?
Okay. Partially in response to that, through the chair, our work sessions are open, and actually I know I've been part of conversations for the student rep and the military advisors. They are advisory members, but they're welcome to come. A lot of times it's just schedules for them that they're not required like we are, but they're welcome to come, and I would reinforce that in a number of our work sessions coming up would be good for to have them there, as well as making sure that in this superintendent search, keeping to that we make sure stakeholders are involved, and I think we did pretty well last time. I think we can still do better and keep moving. Suggestion for maybe going forward, if we're getting a sense of a listed President Luke, sort of what seemed to be top 3, top 2, if we want to settle on that, say what questions we may want to have. I would suggest that we, as we narrow and be able to move forward, that you might appoint a committee or 2 or 3 people to contact these groups, get those questions asked, and then be able to come back with a recommendation. I know overall, in line with the comments that have been made, I have some leanings towards AASB in terms of best meeting our needs, not simply by cost, because I think our total cost will run 25 to 30,000, whoever we go with. And we need to know we're putting into that. And we know we're going to pay more for the superintendent, and we'll have that discussion maybe in a little bit here. But I think it's worth, prior to taking the action between now and when we take action, that we actually get our questions asked and make sure that we have our I's dotted and T's crossed. So,
Ms. Matheson?
I think Mr. Doran just said it perfectly.
Perfect. So I would like to, as I stated at the very beginning of the meeting, go ahead and create that ad hoc committee. And if you have specific questions for each one of these, it looks like we have Ray and Associates, McPherson and Jacobson, and AASB. I do have a couple of items that I wrote down for AASB already, such as our credit, the background checks, the willingness to do more advertising and reach out to more diverse places. And do we have the staff, or do they currently have the staff to, or the ability to do this type, this heavy of a search with their other model and all of their other responsibilities for the state of Alaska? And those are the current questions I have for AASB. Were there any other questions that we would like to add on to that for AASB? Mr. Doran?
One that I often ask when I'm interviewing somebody, and it's been a while since I've interviewed them in a sense, is what's different now than then? And I think that would be appropriate. We undertook that in the height of the pandemic. There were also things that were learned out of it. I think our survey forums were pretty, we had some pretty good stuff going there. There were things, so I would say, okay, what would you do differently now than you did then? So what more do you bring to the table? And it's in line with what more can you do to get the word out, and those types of things. But I frame it in that, what's new? What do you bring to the table now that's different from before?
Okay. Ms. Marati?
For Ray and Associates, my question due to their past is, will we have an opportunity to review the application questions prior to them being public?
Will we have the opportunity to review
Application questions to ensure that they're legal prior to them sending them out?
Ms. Matheson?
I wouldn't want to ask that. I would want that to be part of that contract. You know what I mean? That they would have to have those questions to us prior to them going to the public.
Ms. Smith?
I will say that that is one of the reasons that I'm not totally willing to not consider AASB, that I did appreciate the process that they went through that allowed us to create the questions that we were asking. And that they advised us on, to say that's not an appropriate question, that is an appropriate question, or don't forget to ask this question. And I did really appreciate that, considering the inexperience of our board, and we will be pretty much right back where we were at that time. And it's really, honestly, at the thought of hiring a superintendent, I cannot say that I even remotely considered going to AASB again. But, you know, through reading all the proposals, it seems like phase one with most of these companies is talk to the board, you know, get a sense of where we're at, and then they run with it. And that was not the experience that we had with AASB, that they really came multiple times and had us create a really specific ask that was, you know, unique for us, instead of just running and doing their thing. But I would like to know from AASB, a question that I had that I felt was never really answered from our last search was, where did they advertise? You know, they say, well, we've been advertising, but like, exactly where? I want to know a lot of details about this search, because we did have a failed search, and I feel like just having, we're going to be a demanding client. Well, at least I want to be a demanding client. And you know, not inappropriately demanding, but more demanding than we were the last time. I'd like to know, where are you advertising? What are you getting responses from each of those outreaches? Like, if they could measure, we got so many contacts from this type of advertising, so many contacts from that type of advertising. I like to possibly even view the ad that they're putting out there, especially if it's to a diverse population or a specific population. I like to see that ad. You know, even if they're not asking us permission for that ad, if they're saying, here's the ad we put in. I just think that personally, I'd like to have a lot more contact than just, hey, we dumped in the applicants into the file, you know, take a look at them. So that's all. I just, if you're contacting ASB about those questions, maybe when you're saying, do you have time for this, maybe letting them know that we're not going to be an average client.
Ms. Marati?
Last year, we actually had this exact same discussion, and I asked the president to specifically ask AASB about how they ensure that advertisements reach underrepresented groups. And so I'm curious through the chair if Mr. Doran recalls that.
Mr. Doran?
Right, and I believe, again, memory serves me, part of their discussion was their work with NSBA, and they closely work with about 11, at that time, 11 or 12. I was looking at my notes recently from back then. So 11 or 12 additional state associations, and they, and I'm sorry I don't have the full titles, but the Black and the Latino and the Indigenous groups associated with through NSBA that they were definitely reaching out to. And so, but I think generically that's a question we continue to ask, and that there are ways to make sure that that's done. And I think as I'm kind of thinking more of doing teacher interviews and staff interviews, what we're asking is, we're doing that final piece. I think there's some leaning towards AESB, but we don't want to just say, oh, well, we worked with you before. We still need some guarantees. We're going to be, that step up. And so I think having these questions and just asking them right on and making sure, because things have changed too, and better opportunities, more groups where that outreach is, and maybe it pushes them to take other groups in mind. But my understanding, my memory is that very specifically they addressed that with us last time and did reach out that way, but finding out exactly where I don't have that list. And if I could say one other thing, just on Ray and Associates, that really interests me in their cut and paste. Their long list of searches they did, that's in the cover letter. Besides just saying that they're interested in, they did some things in Alaska, but particularly this long list inserted multiple paragraphs in the cover and then repeated again in their proposal, which is probably the more appropriate place to put that. The big question with them that I would have is really how deep do we get to look at their pool? They do the interviews. They basically the preliminary interviews. They select the 10 or so that they would put forward. They make their recommendations on the things, but it is really interesting, and they have a pool that talking with them, they have a pool of people who are interested in positions. So they're, in a sense, working both for the people they recruit into their pool generically, as well as those that we would be a client. So there's a little bit of a mix there that I think is important to keep in mind. And I guess another question I would have for them is in terms of the Anchorage pool, how many Alaskans did they attract into their pool?
Thank you. Were there any other questions that we would like to reach out to these 3 companies with? The 3 companies that that if I'm following well is, yes, oh, you got it? Okay. I've got a long list for AESB. I have 3 questions for Ray and Associates, and currently I have none for McPherson and Jacobson. Ms. Matheson?
Well, I'd like similar questions to McPherson and Jacobson also. So I want to know where they're advertising. I want to know if we are demanding how they're going to work with us, because we've gone through this. We're a little more experienced. We don't want to make the same mistakes, and we want to make sure that we get the best bang for our buck.
So we had a failed search a year ago. How will you help us to have a successful one this time?
Thank you.
Ms. Marati?
And based off what comes up when you Google them, I want to ask, I think we're asking another one the same question, but what's different now? Mr. Doran added it to one of them. So seeing it sounds like they've had some issues in the past, that doesn't mean that they do now. So what's changed since then? Oh, and I agree with Ms. Matheson the same questions from Ray and Associates for McPherson.
I have Ms. Sanderson and then Ms. Smith.
And I think we need to ask ourselves, you know, how difficult were the people and boards they were working with, and circumstances also. I mean, all that has something to play in decisions being made, so.
Ms. Smith?
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that each of the organizations understands our timeline desire. Like you said, we're not putting off our hire until March. That I do see that, you know, most of them say as determined by the board. So that was just for AESB, that was part of my concern of making sure that they had the resource to dedicate to our timeline. I don't want the timeline to get away from us. So I do see 8 to 12 weeks and then 5 general stages. You know, those are, I would rather put our timeline to them. Can your organization make this hire happen by the first of the year, or, you know, 1st of February, or whatever we're getting at here? I would rather ask them, can you make this happen by then?
Mr. Doran and then Ms. Marotti.
A couple of points. Question for all would be, how do they recommend handling internal applicants? Just what their recommendation is. It's our decisions, but I think that's an important thing whenever we look at these. And when I look at searches over the years in this district, we've sometimes had internal and we've had external, and how they're handled. Just for the McPherson, looking at my notes from last time, they also do a vetting. They do the vetting process and then give us a short list. Whereas ASB, we will get to see all the applications. I think there was one other who technically gave us, I think, access to all the applications, although it wasn't quite clear if it was just those they were putting forward that we got. But with ASB, we know we get to see all. So I think that's a question as we do that. Yeah, just I'll leave it there for the moment.
Ms. Marotti?
Could the ad hoc committee call references? So I mean, a lot of places, a lot of just like people, you know, look great on paper when they're talking about themselves or their organization. It looks great, but you really find out more information when you call who they've worked with. So I'm wondering if the ad hoc committee could call references, for example, the districts that they list that are listed in the spreadsheet, and ask them all the same questions. So were they dependable? Were they flexible? Were they engaging? Did they meet the timeline? And then report that back to the board? Is that something that maybe the ad hoc committee could do?
Through the chair, can I answer?
Go ahead, Mr. Doran.
Yes, we can. And we did last time. That's where some of the notes I have, those experiences of districts. But that was cleared. They give the references, and we can go beyond that to another person on the board, beyond what they suggest or whatever. And you can check papers, newspaper articles, and all of that. It's perfectly cleared.
May I follow up?
Go ahead, Ms. Marotti.
To clarify, is this something that the ad hoc committee could be assigned to do
Yes.
by your assignment for the board?
Yes. This is something that absolutely the ad hoc committee can call the references. And I'm grateful that they all provided references. So that's absolutely something that can happen. So, oh, Ms. Sanderson?
So what do we, if we're in, I mean, so to me, if we're gonna start calling people and getting all this information, I mean, then we doing the work ourselves.
No, just on,
Okay, okay,
just,
because I'm going like, what are we paying them to do? It's like, I'm
No.
like, I don't know, I'm not signing for that.
we are just calling references on these 3 companies. So it looks like from here on out, I will create an email, get that sent out no later than first thing in the morning to these 3 companies. If I could have you through Ms. Richardson, email Ms. Richardson if you are liking to be on this ad hoc committee, and I will work on creating that ad hoc committee, and we will get started, because if I look at my calendar, we will be having the vote on October 4th. Therefore, our ad hoc committee needs to have a recommendation no later than the morning of the 29th. So we have a week and a half. And so I want to make sure that we get this ad hoc committee going. So if you would like to be on the ad hoc committee, if you will go ahead and please email Ms. Richardson, and she will get that to me no later than in the morning. And we will get that started ASAP. I had Ms. Matheson and then Mr. Doran.
Thank you. So with all of the exclusions and additions, I'm a little confused. Which companies are we choosing from? Which one?
So
Or all of them?
if I'm reading the room correctly,
Mhm.
we were, the 3 that kind of rose to the top during our meeting was McPherson and Jacobson, Ray and Associates, and AASB.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, is there anyone that would like to, is that amenable to everyone that those 3 go to the ad hoc committee? Well, I can't say it that way. Is there anything, any other companies that you would like to push forward to the ad hoc committee? Ms. Sanderson and then
Like-
Mr. Doran.
I'd like the BWH, I mean, they, one, yeah, yep, whatever they're. What's their
And
name?
this is the one that, okay.
And they had some good numbers.
Mr. Doran?
Get all their
Could
students.
we get, through the chair, what questions, what why BWP,
Ms. Sanderson?
what their strengths did you say?
Diversity, large numbers of school districts that they dealt with. Those 2 things spoke to me quickly.
Okay. So before that, 2 things that I wanted to just point out on the spreadsheet that we have under Ray and Associates, the very last page, there was a notation, I believe that was left over from the previous review of them. We are not Arizona. And I just want to note that that was an issue in their proposal 2 years ago. I did not see it in this one. I think they corrected that, so that was good. But it was there 2 years ago. And they addressed us as Arizona. They did lots of work in Arizona, meaning Alaska. The other thing I was just going to say, Ms. Luke, since we need to let Carm know right away, why don't we, people who are interested, just have people indicate to you who's interested in being on the ad hoc committee, and then you have those names and you can think about them and decide that.
Right.
Or saves a step.
Who is interested in being in the ad hoc committee? If you will just raise your hand. I just want to note for the public, it was Mr. Doran and Ms. Matheson that rose their hand that would like to be on this ad hoc committee. And I will raise my hand as well. Oh, Ms. Sanderson? Ms. Sanderson? Yes? Okay. Actually, that's very easy. So then our ad hoc committee will be Mr. Doran, Ms. Sanderson, and Ms. Matheson, with Ms. Sanderson as the ad hoc committee chair.
Twist her arm and then twist again.
Perfect. I will get these emails sent out, like I said, either tonight or first thing in the morning. Mr. Doran?
Just, this might be to Ms. Smoline and Carm. If it's a possibility that we could work at that, we could either be on a conference call or come down and do it from here. If we can work that out with the companies, because that was hard the last ad hoc committee. I mean, I was able to talk, but with each company, but our whole committee was not able to talk individually. It was just a report back. So that might be a thought anyway, but I'll leave that to Mrs. Sanderson since she's our chair.
And maybe that's something that you guys can create kind of a script and take notes on. So,
As far as a meeting place, if we know times and we can reserve the superintendent's conference room or some other conference room here in the building for you to all meet. And then most of our conference rooms have a Zoom capability. If you want to have that kind of a conversation with them, they also have the intercom phone that you could do.
thank you. And Ms. Sanderson, if you'll just work with Ms. Richardson and the other people, the rest of the members on this ad hoc committee to get things scheduled and make sure that we get the recommendation from the committee in time to be able to properly notice it. And we look forward to the committee's findings at the next, not tomorrow's board meeting, but the next board meeting. And I just want to thank, again, Ms. Richardson, thank you so much for all of the hard work that you put in to help make this an easier process and so that it's easy to see from a glance. We appreciate that dedication. If there are no other thoughts, I'd like to realize it's time. I'd like to ask for a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Objection.
All right, we have to go to a vote. Yes to continue.
I don't think we got a
Oh,
second.
do we have a second to the objection?
No, we didn't get a second to the first motion.
Did we not get it? I thought there was a second.
He said it, he objected, we're voting.
I should go motion second.
We need to have a second before it's an actual motion on the floor. So it was not. Mr. Doran, do you have something else that you would like to?
Right. I think that it's worthwhile. We don't get full conversation, and we won't have a full conversation tonight. But I think there are some topics we should have on our list that people are thinking about. We've mentioned timeline. I think a lot of them proposals address a lot of that. We've decided, in absence of others, that we're going with a search agency rather than doing it ourselves. how we want to look at internal, external candidates, be thinking about the qualities and qualifications that we would like to see in a superintendent. What our contract parameters are was briefly mentioned, and I know in conversations and before, we knew we were going to have to pay more. That's going to go up, and we need to be addressing these things earlier rather than later. And I think it's also another topic for us to, if for consideration, is transition support. And what I mean is this year, Ms. Moline stepped into a position that's really helping us, keeping us moving, keeping our ship afloat and stable, and setting us on a path to move forward. And so we have two things going, and I think that's an important part of our transition, how we support currently as we continue through this year with Ms. Moline's leadership, and as we get ready for the new for a new person. So those are topics that I just don't want to get lost. If it's too late to talk about any of those now, then that's the will of the board. But I think we seriously need to be thinking about those areas and having our minds.
And I think I agree. Those are things that need to be first once a company comes on board. I know that you had emailed me earlier about adding that, and I said, yes, let's go ahead. And the more, and I apologize, the more that I recalled of the last super search, that was something that we worked hand in hand with AASB on to ensure that we have a good handle on what the qualifications are, the direction we want to take, the questions we want to have, getting that stakeholder input, what we want on the application itself, what we want as minimum qualifications. And I truly believe with the guidance of one of these companies, we will have a more clear and defined search, especially because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people on this board have already been through a super search. And so, yes, we do have a young board. Yes, we do have some rough edges. However, I believe that because 5 of the 7 members that will be on this board while through this hiring process have already been through at least one, and then we've been through an interim and also a chief school administrator negotiation and hire. I believe that it will be a much more refined process, especially when we have those when you have those 2 new board members sitting in these seats up here. And I believe that that would be a more correct time to do that, to ensure that their input and their recommendations are included in that conversation. Because I won't be at the seat come time to make those final decisions. And I believe that respecting their opportunity to participate from the very beginning of that part of that process, I think would be important. Are you amenable to that, Mr. Doran?
I've heard what you said.
Thank you. Ms. Marati.
Is there any way, I understand what you're saying, that a lot of these, we want to include the search company with. One of them, though, is timeline. Do you have, and I thought we talked about it at the last board meeting, is that we were going to talk about timeline today. Is there like a rough draft or an estimate of timeline that we can just briefly discuss?
Sure. I know that during, in most of these, it is between 2 and 3 months of a process. Mm-hmm. And I would recommend that it gets started pretty much immediately to start that process so that a decision can be made at the beginning of February at the very latest. So that would be, you start in October and do all of your background, and then put it out towards the end of October into November, start looking at candidates in December, because if I recall correctly, AASB, one of the things that they stated is superintendents start making their decisions on if they will stay or go in December and have to give their notice, and that we don't close until the beginning of January.
And if I could, just on your timeline, the emphasis on usually by the winter break, a decision has been made one way or the other in the head of a superintendent. And so that's in my experience, that's when the fruit is the ripest, is right during that winter break. So having that timeline would get you to the biggest pool of interest. Whether they're viable applicants, that's another question, but that's kind of the prime time.
I think that was the biggest takeaway I took from ASB, discussing that. Mr. Dorn and then Ms. Maroney.
Just a couple of quick comments. One is, I think when we look at the timelines, all of these have indicated that once selected, probably within 1 or 2 weeks, they would be looking to start with us. I think in terms of the listing of the things, the topics that I pointed out there, very, very much we need all the board members, including the new board members, input into it. I suspect they are listening or will listen to the recording. They've all been attending meetings and listening to our meetings. And so that also gives them some of those questions. It will be refined, certainly, even though many of us have gone through this process. And we have the basis for a lot of our beginning documentation that has been updated within the last 2 years. Had not been for a number of years before that. So we're in a good position for any group we go with, but that we're all thinking about, maybe jotting down our own notes so that when we do sit down, we can get to these topics pretty quickly and get that conversation. So thank you.
Ms. Maroney.
Thank you for entertaining that topic. So I'm on the same page. So if we, on the October 3rd, 4th, October 4th, regular meeting, we're going to vote on the vendor, and then we're going to get started immediately. And you said we're going to do the background and hope to put out the job advertisement by the end of October. Was that?
Or start on the process to ensure that you have those candidates that are searching during that December timeframe, so that, because that's our end goal, right, is to have it available during that December timeframe while superintendents are making the decision on, am I staying? Am I going to apply for a new district?
Okay. So we're not putting the job ad out at the end of October, because I'm looking at the schedule for October and we don't have a work session available. So we're picking the vendor in October and then getting the job ad out by December so that the candidates can apply in December, and then we'll be looking at the candidates, say, January.
Correct. I would hope.
Okay, good goal. Thanks.
Best case scenario. Best case scenario. Any further questions? All right. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Any objections? We are adjourned.
Thank you for your forbearance.